Hi Gordon. Today we're going to change the starter on a 300D turbo or a 300D, the same starter setup. It's not that complicated except for the very top bolt on the starter. The very top bolt on the starter is kind of a booger to get to. So what we're going to have to do is drop the transmission down just a little bit. We're going to drop the back transmission mount so we can get that to that top starter bolt. And this is what the starter looks like. You can see that it's got two bolts, one here and one here. They're 180 degrees apart, and they're 10 millimeter, or that's the size of the hex that screws that bolt in. So the starter goes front to back like this if this is the front of the car, and it's on the passenger side. Now you see them both ways depending upon the model. The solenoid of the starter might be on top or it might be on bottom. Either way, the starter fits into the same place on the flywheel assembly. The big bolt, this top bolt right here, is the one that's hard to get to. And about the only way that I know to get to it is with a very, very long extension. We're going to use a 10 millimeter hex. That's the size of that bolt, and you can see that we're going to have a wobble joint on it. So we got a wobble joint, and I've got it in a 1/2 inch drive, all of this, because that bolt can be really tight. And if I measure this, I got about 30 inches of extension there. So I've got two extension bars, going to end up with 30 inches roughly of extension to get all the way to the back of that transmission to break that bolt loose. The bottom bolt is not hard, it's the top bolt that's tough. In addition, in order to drop the transmission and the drive shaft center link, we've got just a set of 3/8 drive sockets and a couple of extensions and a wobble joint. And then to disconnect the battery, or the starter from the battery, what we're going to need is a 17 millimeter on that nut right there, and the solenoid wire is just a Phillips screw that we're going to disconnect. And that's essentially it. We may have another couple of things as we get underneath the car, but that's the essence of changing that starter. Oh, one more thing. We're going to have to disconnect the battery, the positive terminal on the battery, because that's hot all the time to this lead right here. So in order to not have that thing ground out and create all kinds of sparks and scare the life out of you, we'll disconnect the battery before we start. So let's go look at the top view. We've got the downpipe disconnected from a 300D, and so we can look and see what it looks like from the top. It makes a good view for the camera. Let's go look at that. Okay. The starter is right here. As you can see, we've got the breather off this thing and the downpipe disconnected, so you can see where the starter is. If you look at the battery right here, then just straight down from the battery, if this stuff is disassembled, you can see it. Now, you don't have to take this downpipe off to take the starter off, but it makes a good camera angle up here because the bolt I'm talking about is right there. That bolt, as you can see, the only way we can get to it is with that long extension above the transmission, so we're going to have to go underneath the car and get that bolt, of course. But there's not much room. If you fought it long enough, you might be able to do it without dropping the transmission, but it's so much quicker and easier to drop the transmission down a few inches from my point of view to get that top bolt off. The bottom one is not too hard. And then, of course, we're going to disconnect the wires on the front of the starter. And there's a couple of little 10 millimeter bolts that also attach the starter. There's a little bracket in the front of it that attaches it. But the next step is to go underneath the car and disconnect the things. Oh, while we're up here, we might as well just disconnect that battery. Disconnect the battery terminal first so that we don't have sparks all over. Okay. Okay, Gordon, now we're underneath the car and we've got it all jacked up. We need it several inches off the ground in order to be able to work under it, so I've got it safely mounted on some jack stands, all four wheels. And I have a little jack that I use for purposes like this because it's it's a lot easier to maneuver under the car. And see, what I've got is some blocks right underneath the transmission pin here. And if I complete the process, I've got it almost jacked up. But you watch, as I jack it up, I'll take the pressure off the mount, and you can see it go up just a little bit. And that's where I'll have it to secure it when I loosen the bolts. And then the first thing I'm going to do is disconnect two 13mm bolts that hold the support bracket on the driveline. I don't want to damage that driveline in any way or bend it, so there are two 13mm bolts that hold that support bushing, and so what I need to do is disconnect those. And so if we use a wobble socket and a wobble joint of 13mm, we can get those two bolts loose, and that's the first thing we do. So all we're going to do is let that be loose. You see now it has a little play in it, and it'll drop down a little bit. And now we're going to switch to a 17mm socket, and a 17mm socket, we're going to take 4 bolts out that hold the back cross member on. So you can see these 4 bolts is what holds that back cross member. And if we loosen them up, of course we got it jacked up and supported. We're going to let the transmission down once we drop these 4 bolts out. We're just going to keep it, we're going to keep the transmission mounted to the cross member. There's no reason to take the mount off the cross member. We'll just drop the transmission, cross member and all. And that gives us a little room to get our 10mm socket on that top bolt on that starter. So now you see it's loose. Now very carefully, I don't want to drop this thing too far, but if you watch the transmission, I'm going to drop it just a little bit. See, it's dropping down. And I don't know, I've probably dropped it 3 or 4 inches. And you see, the driveline still has some play, and the transmission is kind of loose on its mount, but it gave me enough room at the top of the transmission. And now I'm going to come from very back behind the mount. You see where I'm putting my wrench? Behind this transmission mount. And now I'm going to go along the top of the transmission and come in like that. And now perhaps it's best if Gordon gets on top with the camera so he can see the hex 10mm going into that top nut. Okay, now you can see that hex head sticking up through there, and I have to be a little patient to get that hex head in that bolt. But now I can maneuver my wrench from below, and I can get it in there. And now it's in there. And you got to make sure it's seated, because you don't want to round off that bolt. Now I think it's in there. Let's see. Yeah. No. There, I broke it loose. Once you break it loose, you're kind of home free. And you see? It's turning. Once I get that bolt, the rest is easy. There. Now, what I usually do is just leave it just like that, because it's hard enough to get that hex head in there. And actually, it's only because I have another 10mm hex socket. If you don't have one, then you're going to have to take it out of there. It's no big deal. You can see the other one is right here. I don't know, Gordon, can you see my finger? Of course, you know from where we pointed at the starter when we were up on the bench, the other bolt is right below it. It'll be real obvious to you, and that's a fairly easy one to get to. And all we need is just a standard ratchet and another 10mm. So I'll take that one off, and then the rest of it, Gordon, you'll have to come down underneath to see the wires that I'm going to take off in order to get the starter out. One of the things we forgot to mention is in order to get the starter out, you need to disconnect this little shock damper that's on the suspension right here. It's just 2 bolts. They're 17 millimeters. So actually, I think if you just take one side of it loose, it'll be good enough. We'll see. But that's the only way to drop the starter out. That's where it has to come through that hole. So all we're going to do is just take this bolt out. It's real easy. It happens to be a self-locking nut on it, so it's going to be hard all the way off. But nonetheless, as soon as we get that out of there, that'll make way for the starter. And then all we need to do is get it far enough out of the way, and it's in a rubber mount, so that's fine. Now we've got to take the 2 wires off. There's a 17 millimeter and there's a screw right here. We need a short stubby screwdriver. I thought I had one with me. There it is. So we need a stubby screwdriver to get the screw off right here. That's the solenoid wire. And then this nut should be a 17 millimeter that holds the battery wire onto the starter, the starter motor. So you take that off. I've already disconnected that bottom bolt, that bottom 10 millimeter. I told you it was real easy to get to. I took it off. So now the starter, oh, one more bolt. I'm sorry. There's a top bracket. It's a 10 millimeter bolt. That starter is in kind of a tough position. I think one of the problems is when the engine is dropped, or engine transmission drop down like that, it creates a little bind. So I think if I jack it back up like that, I can get the starter to drop, have enough clearance. Now we've got that little bracket on the front of the motor disconnected, so it ought to just drop right out of there, and you can see it is, and it's kind of heavy, so be careful. Yeah? Now, before we put this new starter back up in there, it's a rebuilt starter. And it comes, by the way, with a solenoid, all rebuilt from Bosch. The bracket attaches with a couple of 10 millimeter bolts, and it's a lot easier if you put the bracket on before you stick it up in there. So, all we want to do is put that on there. And then, of course, the bracket just mounts to the engine, and the starter mounts about at that angle. So that's all we have to do, tighten those up, put it in there. Put it in and just all reverse order, and we're all set to go.